Right, before that then, let's have a roundup. You might have heard Ollie Barrett there talking about Julian Assange. He was sentenced today to 50 weeks in jail for breaching his bail conditions. We saw the scenes a couple of weeks ago, of course, the awful scenes of him being carried out of the Ecuadorian embassy. Spent years there, of course, basically claiming asylum there. You know this. He was in the embassy from 2012, I think, to avoid extradition to Sweden because he always believed that he was in danger of being extradited to the United States. He denied the sexual assault allegations against him. But anyway, he was in Southwark Crown Court today facing sentencing because he admitted breaching bail conditions. He said, I did what I thought at the time was right, and it was the best or perhaps the only thing that I could have done. Speaking for him, Mark Summers QC said his client was gripped by fears of rendition to the United States over the years because of his work with the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks. As threats rained down on him from America, they overshadowed everything, said Mark Summers QC. Sentencing him, Judge Deborah Taylor told Julian Assange that it was difficult to envisage a more serious example of this particular offence. And I'll quote the judge. The judge said, by hiding in the embassy, you deliberately put yourself out of reach while remaining in the UK. She said this had undoubtedly affected the progress of the Swedish proceedings. So his continued residence at the embassy and the attempts to bring him to justice cost taxpayers £16 million, she said as well. As he was taken down to the cells below, Assange raised a fist to his supporters. They raised their fists in solidarity with him and directed shouts of shame on you towards the court. Human rights campaigner and regular guest on this show, Peter Tatchell, told RT this afternoon, in his opinion, the sentence is excessive.
Well, first of all, let me say that quite clearly Julian Assange did skip bail. That is a criminal offence, and he therefore should face some form of punishment. However, the near maximum sentence of 50 weeks is, in my view, excessive and disproportionate. According to law and sentencing guidelines, a near maximum sentence should only be applied if a person poses a risk to the public or has a history of previous serious convictions. Now, I think it's pretty clear that Julian Assange does not pose a risk to the public, and he has no previous serious convictions. So therefore, in my view, this 50-week sentence is excessive, extreme, and unjustified.
And unnecessary, of course. And it'll get even more serious for Julian Assange tomorrow, because a request by the US to extradite him for the leaks, of course, the Iraq logs and everything else, that request by the US will be heard by a London court tomorrow. What they want to do, of course, is make an example of Assange and send a message out to every other would-be whistleblower. If you screw with us and embarrass us and leak information that shows us to be the monstrous cabal that we are, well, we'll come after you and we'll bury you. And that's what it's all about. Right, it's 10 minutes past the hour. This one won't go away. Jeremy Corbyn should provide a full explanation as to why he wrote the foreword to a book considered anti-Semitic. Who said that? Who's demanding a full explanation from Jezza? Well, it's the president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. That's who. Because back in 2011, Corbyn wrote the foreword for a new edition of J.A. Hobson's book, Imperialism, a Study. This book was written in 1902. Corbyn wrote the foreword for the new edition 8 or so years ago. So the Times ran a story this morning saying that the book is an outrage. It's got lots of anti-Semitic tropes in it, etc., etc. Labour says that Jeremy Corbyn completely rejects the anti-Semitic elements of the book. Anti-Semitism. Are you sick of it yet? Well, I am, a little bit. Anyway, here's a Sky News reporter, Tamara Cohen, herself Jewish. Why am I saying that? I'll tell you in a minute. Here's Tamara reporting on it with Adam Bolton earlier.
This is a book by John Hobson, a Victorian radical thinker, which was reissued 8 years ago. Jeremy Corbyn, then an obscure backbencher, wrote a glowing foreword saying it was brilliant, very controversial, but he thought it was very prescient. And essentially it talks about how imperialism was driven by European financial houses. And those financial houses, he says, were controlled by men of a singular and peculiar race, which have behind them many centuries of financial experience. And he also goes on to talk about the Rothschilds and a number of other sort of anti-Semitic tropes which have been discussed quite a lot recently in the context of the Labour anti-Semitism debate. He doesn't mention during this foreword that Hobson was anti-Semitic, although I think it was pretty widely considered at the time. And he also does talk in this introduction about racist caricatures in the book of African and Asian people. So that is why a lot of Labour MPs are going to be deeply concerned about this and about why the response has been to defend it rather than to apologise for it.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned that Tamara is Jewish is because if I was Adam Bolton, I would have said, Tamara, I think you're Jewish. I think you're of the Jewish faith. And presumably Tamara would have said yes. I would have said, listen, does it bother you, this sort of stuff, as somebody who is Jewish or of the Jewish faith, or do you not give a rat's arse? That's what I would have asked her, but they're not allowed to do that. That's why I mentioned she was Jewish. It's not relevant otherwise. Right, so there has been concern raised that some Labour folks are defending Corbyn and not apologising for him. Apparently people should be apologetic today, because Hobson wrote in 1902 that finance in Europe was driven by men of a singular and peculiar race who have behind them many centuries of financial experience. He suggested that European countries would not engage in a war if the House of Rothschild and its connections set their face against it. So he suggested in 1902 that the Rothschild family were incredibly powerful and that basically what they wanted to happen was happening. If they didn't want war, there wouldn't be war, effectively, he said. Now, in the foreword in 2011, Corbyn praised the book's brilliant analysis of the pressures that were hard at work pushing for a vast national effort in grabbing new outposts of empire on distant islands and shores. He also described Hobson's railing against the commercial interests that fuel the role of the popular press with tales of imperial might that then lead on to racist caricatures of African and Asian peoples as correct and prescient. That was the bones of the foreword by Jeremy Corbyn, right? Now, Rebecca Long-Bailey, very loud, Rebecca Long-Bailey, she's a Labour MP, staunch Corbyn file, and she was on Sky Breakfast with Sarah Jane Mead today to defend Corbyn against this article in the Times. Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Jeremy, he's already said yesterday, in no way, supports or sanctions the words that were used in relation to anti-Semitism.
So why did he write a glowing foreword for this book?
He was writing in the context of, I think, Hobson being, a political thinker of his time, in the same way that other MPs have spoken about that same individual. But he in no way sanctions any. No, he in no way. I'm sorry, I have to be clear about this. He in no way sanctions any anti-Semitic comments that are made by any individual, never mind that this particular individual.
In light of that, then, should he have written a foreword for the book?
Well, he was commenting on in a wider political sense, as I understand. I haven't read the foreword myself, or indeed the book.
To a book.
Well, as I say, I haven't read the foreword or the book, but he was commenting in a wider political sense, in the same way that many MPs have done over the last few years. I mean, this, gentleman in question was a political thinker of his time, whether you agreed with his opinion or not. We know that numerous Labour and Conservative colleagues have commented on him, whether that's negatively or positively, taking certain parts of his thinking into consideration. But in no way would the Labour Party or Jeremy Corbyn condone any anti-Semitic comments of any kind.
You don't need to waterboard people to get information out of them. I would just put them in a room with Rebecca Long-Bailey and Terry Christian, and after 5 minutes, the accused will give up his grandmother to get out of that room. She's got a big mouth, as Bailey. She's an awful, condescending, sneering woman, to be honest. A great example for momentum. And this progressive lunatic left that has come to the forefront of UK politics in recent years. Marvellous example, Bailey. Completely intolerable. At least for me, anyway. That's my opinion. So political commentators couldn't wait to jump on the hateful anti-Semite Jeremy Corbyn. They couldn't wait. Here's Lucy Fisher. She's the correspondent, the defence correspondent for The Times. It's her newspaper that broke this story that 8 years ago Jeremy wrote the foreword for a hateful anti-Semitic book. Here's Lucy Fisher of The Times.
I think what's interesting about this book by John Hobson, a classic tome on imperialism, is that there are two
classic
things.
Radical
tome on imperialism, is that it tells us a lot about Corbyn's views in terms of the ways he might run the country, viewing the US as an anti-imperialist aggressor, as Venezuela as the main source of hope, as NATO as an occupying force. But of course, the real news value in this, and what's really genuinely shocking, is the fact that the book peddles a Jewish conspiracy theory, talking about Jewish financiers being the pressure behind Western and particularly British imperialism. And this is something that Jeremy Corbyn, in a foreword to a new edition of this book, has not even acknowledged at all and simply gone on to praise it as an amazing analysis.
But what if the claims made in the book by Hobson happen to be true? What if? We'll come back to that one. Here's City AM editor Christian May. He couldn't wait to jump in either.
It's definitely a shocker, even in the long list of shocking encounters with anti-Semitism that Jeremy Corbyn has notched up. There are plenty of classic books in economics and in history that contain elements that are unique to the time in which they were written. And you can praise parts of the analysis while recognising that other parts of it simply don't pass muster today. As Lucy said, Jeremy Corbyn didn't do that. He embraced the analysis in its whole. There are only three possible explanations. He's either thick as mince, or he's an anti-Semite, or he's both.
Or he didn't read the book.
I think if you look at the quality of the foreword, which rather suggests perhaps somebody ghostwrote it for him, he's definitely engaging with the arguments. I'm sure he read the book. It might be the only book he's ever read, and he lapped it up.
What a dickhead. It might be the only book he ever read. Give me a break. That's a bit petulant, a bit childish, a bit silly. Right. It's not prescient today, is it not? I've been doing quite a bit of research on this, not today, but for years. So let me give you a little bit of the benefit of my research. And I read some articles today that I have read before, but I think they're very relevant today. Here's an article from myjewishlearning.com, written by a Jewish editor. Not written this year or last year, but written about 3 or 4 years ago, right? This is myjewishlearning.com. It's a Jewish publication, very widely read. The headline is, "The idea that Jews are good with money is one of the oldest Jewish stereotypes, but it's undeniable that Jews are well represented in finance and business." Let me read a couple of passages. So I'm reading directly from it. If I deviate, I will say straight away that I'm deviating. Okay, I'm not going to editorialise here and selectively cherry-pick bits that suit my argument. Let me read from this article. Jews did hold prominent financial positions in Europe, which made them ready scapegoats in times of economic crisis. For centuries, so-called court Jews acted as the principal financiers for the European aristocracy's projects. In the 1760s, one of those court Jews, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, established a banking business in Germany that would eventually grow into a vast international conglomerate and yield one of the largest family fortunes in world history. The Rothschild name became synonymous with Jewish financial power, invoked as shorthand for the secretive and outsized power Jews were alleged to wield over the economic fate of the world. Despite his own Jewish ancestry, his parents converted the family to Protestantism when he was a child. Karl Marx, the philosopher who first popularized the idea that capitalism is inherently exploitative, singled out Jews in particular for their role in promoting it. As money lending evolved into institutionalized banking, Jews continued to occupy major positions in the financial world. Across Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, Jews built a number of influential banks, further feeding anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. With mass Jewish immigration to the US, beginning in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jews assumed prominent positions in the growing financial centre of New York. establishing Salomon Brothers, Lehman Brothers, Goldman Sachs and others. They also figured prominently in government financial positions. Since 1987, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve has been a Jew, as have been 4 of the last 8 US Treasury secretaries. Now, this is where I deviate from the article. That's obviously outdated. It's changed. We have had a non-Jewish appointment to the chair of the US Federal Reserve recently, of course, right? So, but anyway, still very relevant. So I go back to the article. Jews are also significantly overrepresented among the wealthiest Americans. Half of the 10 richest Americans in 2016 were Jewish. This according to Forbes, despite the fact that Jews make up less than 2% of the population. Actor Seth MacFarlane drew criticism for joking at the Academy Awards that it's best to be Jewish if you want to continue to work in Hollywood. MacFarlane's bit was based in inarguable fact. More than 80% of top Hollywood studio chiefs are Jews. According to journalist J.J. Goldberg, himself a Jew, such talk veers into anti-Semitism when one speaks of the Jews controlling movies. The implication being that a corporate entity known as the Jews, acting as an organised group, is conspiring to exert its authority. It's undeniable that Jews are disproportionately among the wealthiest Americans and overrepresented in top positions in the financial world, says Goldberg, but it's anti-Semitic to say that the Jews are. Now, at this point, you need to read Gilad Atzmon and Shlomo Zand and others, particularly Gilad, in his writings about Jewish identity politics and Jewish power and challenging Jewish power and speaking about it. Fantastic stuff, this, from J.J. Goldberg. Jews are disproportionately represented and are overrepresented in top positions in finance and in media. But it's anti-Semitic to say that the Jews are, right, overrepresented. I've talked a lot about that with respect to the UK media. So that's a respected Jewish publication. Let's look at another one. Haaretz. Here's an article from February 2018 in Haaretz, written by Ofri Ilani. Let me give you the headline. The headline is, "The link between Jews and money is no longer taboo." After years of focusing on anti-Semitism, more and more historians are daring to deal with a subject long considered untouchable. Let me read a bit of this article. Again, I'm not going to selectively cherry pick bits. Those articles are Googleable. They're Googleable, and you can read them. Obviously, I'm skimming down them. I'm not reading the entire article. I'm picking out salient bits. Until not long ago, most historians preferred to delve deeply into the history of anti-Semitism, or to study the origins of Kabbalah or analyse Jewish philosophy, and not dwell, for example, on the story of Jewish trading and banking empires. That subject was largely neglected by Jewish historians themselves. They left it for thinkers who possessed anti-Semitic inclinations. Isn't that interesting? Jewish historians ignored the study of Jewish influence in banking and trading and left it for people that could be described as anti-Semitic. Wow. Actually, Jewish scholars have often sought to emphasize the socialist elements of their culture, a tendency that was consistent with the leftist bent of many Jewish intellectuals in the mid-20th century. But that situation seems to be changing. Not a few contemporary Jewish intellectuals have embraced capitalism as a legitimate economic approach and are not ashamed of it. As such, they are proud to present their co-religionists as pioneers of capitalism. One of the latter group is the historian Jerry Z. Muller. In his 2010 book, Capitalism and the Jews, Muller homes in on the Jewish financiers who established the Deutsche Bank and the Dresdner Bank. A similar approach is taken in The Chosen Few from 2012 by Maristella Botticini and Zevi Eckstein. Their book describes usurious money lending as a Jewish trade, one in which Jews specialised of their own volition in order to exploit their relative advantages over the uneducated general population. Wow. Their book describes usurious money lending, lending money with interest, as a Jewish trade, one in which Jews specialised of their own volition so that they could exploit their relative advantages over the uneducated general population. The Jewish authors maintain, that by doing this, the Jews brought prosperity to the countries in which they were active. And the past decade has seen the publication of many studies that promote less sweeping claims but describe global networks of commerce in which Jews played a crucial role throughout the modern era. Taboo no more. Taboo no more for Jewish intellectuals to talk about this subject, but off limits for everybody else. Because to speak of Jewish or Zionist power, whether historic Jewish or Zionist power, or in a modern setting, is to invite a shitstorm down on your head. I've spoken often on this and offered my opinions as to why this is. Former US Assistant Treasury Secretary Paul Craig Roberts has taken it on. The overrepresentation of Jews in finance and the media. Why can't we explore it? Why can't we talk about it without being accused of hatred or anti-Semitism? Why? Let me go back to that amazing statement by J.J. Goldberg again. It's fascinating. Goldberg says, despite the fact that Seth MacFarlane was spot on when he talked about needing to be Jewish if you want to work in Hollywood, Goldberg said, saying such things veers into anti-Semitism when one speaks of the Jews controlling movies. The implication being that a corporate entity known as the Jews, acting as an organised group, is conspiring to exert its authority. It's undeniable that Jews are disproportionately among the wealthiest Americans and overrepresented in top positions in the financial world, but it's anti-Semitic to say that the Jews are. And I think J.J. Goldberg is onto something. And I think Gilad Atzmon has taken this on brilliantly. You see, your classic Jew haters in the independent media like Ken O'Keefe, the greatest fraudster that ever walked among us, liar, robber, thief, should be in prison, will use terms like Jew-tube. Jew-tube, it's the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, J-O-O-S, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. It's the Jews. But it's not the Jews. Right? Because despite the fact that Jews, or people who identify as Jews, are vastly overrepresented in UK, American media, and in the world of finance, it doesn't change the fact that the vast majority of Jewish people are not, or those who identify as Jews. And they're not sitting around with hooked noses, cackling, with long fingernails, plotting to take over the world. They're not. Right? But there is a financial elite, many of whom identify as Jewish, many of whom have hidden behind their identity, who do manipulate geopolitics and world events like checkers on a checkers board. And they avoid all scrutiny or any manner of scrutiny by the media by hiding behind their stated Jewishness. Zionism, and I've taken this on and talked about that. Why can't we talk about that? Is Jeremy Corbyn getting at that, or is Jeremy Corbyn stupid? Is my great friend Hayden Hewitt right to suspect that of LiveLeak.com that Jeremy Corbyn is in fact anti-Semitic, that he is just one of those that just blames it all on the Jews? I don't know. I'd be surprised if that was the case. I don't know. But you can't talk about it. You can't delve into it. You can't mention it. You can't explore it. Jewish influence or Zionist influence in politics and in finance without being called racist, hateful, anti-Semitic, or basically a non-person. And no good can come of that. I do not hate anybody. Certainly not any religious identity group, whether it be a Jewish person or a Muslim person or a Christian. I want to understand where we are, why we are where we are, and how we got here. And I'm open for business. No taboos. You can talk about anything on this particular programme. Got into this last night with Lana Lochtef, who believes that what we're seeing emerging in the world at the moment, this depopulation agenda, comes from a clique of Jews. It doesn't. The people behind it are not religious. They don't care about Judaism or Jewishness or God. They're anti-God and anti-religion. Many of them might have Jewish-sounding surnames, and many of them might claim to be Jewish, and maybe all of them go to the synagogue. But that's a front. Because the geoengineering agenda, the depopulation agenda, the wars of attrition and wars of aggression and all the rest of it, Jews are not exclusively immune to the effects of those agendas. Jews are just as likely to be impositioned, to be hurt, and I mean Jews around the world, or to be damaged, or to be ultimately killed by that agenda. You see where I'm going with this? Fascinating. Those articles that I will put links out to earlier on, where Jewish historians are saying, well, let's really get into Jewish power financially and otherwise, and let's look into how a tiny minority identity group could have so many of its number represented in media and in the world of finance. How did that come to be? And what are the implications of it for the average man on the street who thinks that he's Jewish, goes to the synagogue, and for everybody else? It's 27 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm a little bit behind now, but I'm still going to have loads and loads of time with Sharon Gale. I want to do this before we move on because it's a big story. Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro has said that he has stopped an attempted coup by the opposition. Today we continue. Guaido tweeted earlier on today. No, let me do this properly. Let me read this properly. The world's media is predicting mass protests in the coming days after Juan Guaido, the traitor to the Venezuelan people, has been calling for fresh demonstrations. Right. Maduro has come out and said that he's put down this attempted coup. Guaido appeared on television yesterday surrounded by people in uniform, giving the impression that he was winning the hearts and the minds of the Venezuelan military. But he's not. In a pretty explosive address yesterday or last night, Maduro accused protesters of serious crimes. He said they would not go unpunished, and he said the US was plotting against him. Tucker Carlson's monologue on Fox News was brilliant last night. Do you want to hear a bit of it? I thought it was brilliant. By the way, listen to all of this before you lose your shite. He does say one or two triggering things at the outset, but listen. This is Tucker Carlson on Fox News.
What we do know is that Venezuela's current government has done a poor job of providing for its own people. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, yet it remains one of the most impoverished and the most dangerous places on the planet. That is beyond dispute. Everything else is up for debate. Would the overthrow of Maduro make Venezuela a more stable, prosperous country? More to the point, would it be good for the United States? Lots of people claim to know the answer to that, but they don't. They have no idea. If recent history is any guide, nothing will turn out as expected. Few things ever do. But that has not stopped the geniuses in Washington. It has not even slowed them down. This afternoon, on a bipartisan basis, they agreed that the United States ought to jump immediately, face first, into the Venezuela mess.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. Good stuff by Carlson. Then he plays an interview between his Fox News colleague Neil Cavuto and Florida Governor Rick Scott. This defies belief.
Do you think that our presence there would make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I was down on the Venezuelan border last Wednesday. This is just pure genocide. Maduro is killing his own citizen.
Is it worth, though, however strongly you feel, sir, losing American men and women to do just that?
Neil, here's what's going to happen. We are in the process, if we don't win today, we were going to have Syria in this hemisphere. So we can either make sure something happens now, or we can deal with this for decades to come. If we care about families, if we care about the human race, if we care about our fellow worldwide citizens, then we've got to step up and stop this genocide.
That's incredible. Rick Scott from Florida, nutters, absolute nutters, right? Let's send American troops into Venezuela. Extraordinary. And he wasn't the only one. This is a brilliant bit of summing up by Tucker Carlson.
All right. Just want to make sure that's clear. If you care about families and you care about the human race, if you want to stop genocide, you will send your children to Venezuela to fight right now without even thinking about it, without even weighing the consequences. You'll just do it, assuming you're a good person. Of course, if you don't care about families or the human race, if for some reason you despise human happiness and support genocide, then you'll want to join Satan's team and embrace isolationism, the single most immoral of all worldviews. That's what they're telling you. That's what they're demanding you believe. Message received. We've heard it before. But before the bombers take off, let's just answer a few quick questions, starting with the most obvious. When was the last time we successfully meddled in the political life of another country? Has it ever worked? How are those democracies we set up in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, and Afghanistan tonight? How would Venezuela be different? Please explain, and take your time. Next, are we prepared for the refugees a Venezuelan war would inevitably produce? A study by the Brookings Institution found that a collapse of the Venezuelan government could force 8 million people to leave that country. Many of them would come here. Lawmakers in this country propose giving them temporary protected status. That would let even illegal arrivals live and work here, in effect, permanently, as many have before, with no fear of deportation. Are we prepared for that? Are we prepared to absorb millions of new Venezuelan migrants? All of them great people, no question, but many with little education or skills or English. Finally, how exactly is any of this good for the United States? Our sanctions on Venezuela have already spiked our gas prices. That hurts our struggling middle class more than virtually anything we could do. So what's the point of doing that? So our lawmakers can feel like good people? And if they are indeed good people, why do they seem to care more about Venezuela than they care about this country, the one that they run? They're happy to send our military to South America at the first sign of chaos, but U.S. troops to our own border to stem the tide of 100,000 uninvited arrivals a month? No way, they tell us. That's crazy talk.
Good stuff from Tucker Carlson on Fox News yesterday about Venezuela. Watch it very closely in the coming days. There is a gathering momentum in D.C. More and more congressmen and congresswomen coming to the media, coming to the lectern, to the podium, saying we've got to intervene, we've got to do something. It's genocide in Venezuela and all that crap.